All righty, we have made it to another Sunday afternoon and another exciting chapter from Moby Dick, covering chapters 4 through 9 in today's session. And if you're curious about the discussion and you'd like to come on in, we've got a link to the Discord server in the description. Should be good for 7 days, so you are welcome to join in. Uh, so, boy, there's a lot to get to here, and I think it would actually be good if we took this kind of one step at a time. So, looking at the counterpane, that being chapter 4, and I'm just going to go ahead and see if I can pull up an image here of what a counterpane is, because I'd never heard that term before. Oh, goodness. Here you are. Yeah. Turns out a counterpane is just a quilt, right? Which I don't know, Mark, had you ever heard that word before? Because it was a new one for me.
Not a once. I was like, what? What is that?
Yeah.
I had to look up the origins too. It's kind of interesting the way they came about it.
Yeah, and the way it's treated in chapter 4 is that Ishmael had gone to bed with the cannibal, the heathen, and he wakes up and he sees all of the tattoos on Queequeg's arm like blending into the counterpane. And if we look at it, it talks about the counterpane was a patchwork full of odd little particular colored squares and triangles. And this arm of his tattooed all over with an interminable Cretan labyrinth of a figure, no two parts of which were one precise shade. So he just wakes up and his first impression is seeing the tattooed arm and this crazy quilt just kind of blending into each other.
Is this a reference to the coat of Jacob's coat?
A coat of a Joseph, you mean?
Coat of Joseph, sorry. Coat of Joseph, yeah. Is it like a play on that? That it's like now merged into the person? So the multicolor chaos into the cannibal being merged in one with it, his arm and the thing not being, yeah.
Yeah. I don't get the sense that Queequeg has colorful tattoos. They're more like, black lines on his skin. Whereas, you see Joseph's coat translated variously as a multicolored coat or a long-sleeved coat. It must be one of those crazy Hebrew words that nobody knows the definition for, which happens surprisingly often. It's just really funny because like this complete stranger is basically hugging him as he's waking up, and he comments on it like, I don't know, but hey, man, the wild has got the grip on Ishmael. That's all there is to it.
So I think the idea of a coat is that it's like a second skin, right? And so if your skin is blending over in your second skin, like in some sense you're naked, right? Or your cultivation, which is what we're getting into, right, is indistinguishable from your nature. And I think that's the theme that will be revisited.
Yeah, that's real interesting. I'm just not sure how yet.
Well, the blending in general, right? So there's a blending between man and artifact. So
yeah,
that's what, that, and it's not just any man; it's the wild man. And there's 3 blendings going on. There's the hand to the counterpane, right, with the tones and all that, and then he's being hugged, right? So there's all this blending going on,
and there's a marriage reference there too, right? So yeah,
you had almost thought I had been his wife,
Yeah, all this binding and indistinguishability.
But it's forced binding, right? Like it's finding yourself bound instead of willfully accepting the binding.
bound to the savage or the pagan or the heathen or whatever. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, well,
That,
trapped,
that's
right?
which
Yeah,
you
yeah.
were previously in fear of, right? Because that was also
Also, yeah.
You could also link it with Queequeg's strange behavior, where he put on his hat first, and then he went underneath the bed to put on his boots, and then put on the rest of his clothing, which is it's just another very strange thing. And like, he talks about him putting his hat on. By the time he gets out from underneath the bed, his hat's like kind of crumpled up and dirty. Um, and so there's all this. So this is like, and Melville talks about it as, this Queequeg is only like half civilized at this point. He hasn't
Right.
fully integrated the new civilization inside of himself, and he's still figuring these things out.
so it's interesting, right? So what does he cover, right? He covers that which relates to heaven, his head, and that which relates to earth, his feet, right? And then when he covers his feet, he goes down to the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He doesn't seem to get the point of the private versus non-private aspect of preparing for, for dressing and stuff.
Yeah, it's a category error, right? Like, it's the more earthly is considered more intimate in a way, and that stuff he gets covered up to put on his boots, than putting on his pants. So that's yeah, that.
Well, yeah. So that's actually a note I have later on. Is like, yes, like the uncivilizedness does not prevent you from being intimate, right? Like the intimacy is working on a different level than the civilization, right? Because the civilization is an adopted manner of relation, right? Which can have its own intimacy, right? But there's an attunement that is what is his name? Queequeg has,
Queequeg.
right?
Queequeg.
Yeah. So there's an intimacy with nature that the Queequeg has that is absent in the civilized man, right? And then like he calls himself at a certain point that he's the I was guilty of great rudeness, right? While the uncivilized man wasn't. And so there's something there that I've been dancing around as well in my thinking, right? Because I've been listening to people like go into this nature religion stuff, right? And like this nature religion stuff is happens when you live in nature, right? But then you don't have civilization, like literally, right? So it's like fine, like great, that's all awesome, but like the whole point of the Bible is kind of like, okay, no, we start living together and we build a nation. And like when you have a nation, you have different problems, right? And you need to have different primacy, right? And then you get the patriarchy gets established there, right? Because like in some sense, when you're living in nature, the argument was made that it's natural for the woman to stay with her mother so that she can nurture the child more appropriate, right? So there's this establishment of safety, right, where the safety is not conveyed by what the man can protect and like have the dominion, right? But the safety is transferred um, by trust or closeness, right? Like by being an intimate relationship, right? So you have intimate relationship with nature, and then when you have civilization, right, you start having an intimate relationship with civilization, right? Like the skin, right? Like or the garments, I mean, right? Like you start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something symbolic too about the so it's fig leaves in Genesis, right? So and he does that last, and only at request of ultimately when he covers up, we'll say the sacred part of him, and I think that's interesting, right? So if you if you play this all the way out, we've got the covering of the head and the covering of the feet, right? In that way, immediately cover the head. That's closest to heaven, right? Immediately cover the feet under the bed so that nobody sees, and you're closest to the earth. sure. But actually, the sacredness is what is in the middle, right? What draws the two together in some sense, and that is is an important and powerful set of symbols, especially when it's out of order, right? To Manuel's excellent point about civilization, we've agreed upon these things. We're going to go with the Genesis story. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because the fig leaf is also associated to shame, right? And like
Mhm.
this distinct absence of shame, and there's a power in that, right? Like
Yeah.
that's actually revered by our protagonist, and but also he doesn't know how to deal with it, right? Like there's an awkwardness in relating to the nakedness, and then there's also this idea that there's a window to the street, right? So now the external world gets invited in as well, right? And now we have a new level of relationship that we need to establish and new understanding of what am I involved in, right? Because that's also what's happening, right? Like he starts up, it's like, okay, like I'm imposed upon by pressure.
Yeah.
And then he zooms out, and all these layers they get integrated uh, step by step.
Well, you get the impression too that he's, there are windows across the way, and the street's rather narrow, and there's buildings, and people could see in. That's not for Quickhead's sake.
Mhm.
So there's a reputation component there.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you guys make of the fact that Queequeg does his morning shave with a harpoon?
Oh, this
Now
is
that's
more mixing.
yeah, because like on the one hand, if it's high quality steel, and high quality steel was, we'll say, more difficult to manufacture in those days, and so it was more highly prized. It really shouldn't matter, but like a civilized man would have this piece of high quality steel for his face, and this piece of high quality steel for spearing whales. And the fact that he's using the one for both is that crazy mixing of categories right there, which Queequeg himself is, because Queequeg didn't stay in his village wherever he was. Right, he decided he was going to go out on the seas to leave his home and mix the categories himself. So he's basically the mirror image of Ishmael throughout all of this. Somebody who's driven to the edge, but they're driven from different poles into the same um, edge space.
Well,
Right.
and also the I want to point out the convention, right? Like one's more efficient. Like if you have a single good blade, you should use it for everything. Why would you want to use different blades for different things? And the implication is that there isn't a better blade for shaving. You would never shave with a blade of that high harpoon quality on your face. Maybe it's expense, maybe it's something else. But the implication is that, oh no, this is a better way to do it. And he doesn't start out that way, right? He says explicitly, I thought this was nuts. But then I kind of realized, no, that's the right answer. You want to shave with that. It's a way better tool.
And there's a simplicity, right? So he's relating to the union. We have a language of creation book club going on at the same time, right? And it's like, well, what's the category that unifies the two particulars, right? And the native, right? Like he's relating to what unifies the thing, and he's relating to the telos. Like he's not relating to the inherited structure of how things are supposed to happen.
Yeah, and I think it's also an interesting exploration because what he's effectively doing is he's setting something out, right, and saying this is the perspective, and then he's changing that perspective or expanding it. So in some ways, an ideal text, I must say so far. Like I don't think I've read anything quite so good at that as this is, for sure.
So actually, I was on Reddit, and in chapter 7, I looked the end of chapter 7 up. Like I was too long, did not read, but I did read here that the reader starts imposing his Platonism, right? And so like this is also, I think, a precursor of the Platonic, like
Well,
the union.
one thing that is really funny that I noticed, like on what you just mentioned, Mark, is that as Ishmael starts to inhabit the perspective of the Queequeg, or like, oh, this would make sense to break this category in this sense and this sense.
Right.
In the manner as that he starts to inhabit that perspective, he also continues to so his fascination grows with Queequeg, and in the same at the same time he begins to love him. It's just, so there's this relationship that starts brewing. It's like, yeah, this makes sense, and now like
Mm.
I can be one, and I can understand the bizarre, the weird, right? And then there's this loving of the chaos.
Yeah, I don't, as we know, I don't like this word, but if you want to look at the sort of, I'm gonna really, really screw everything up now. The meta narrative within this, right? There's a deeper story going on with the narrator of the story, right? And so now you get back to, I think I mentioned this last week. You get back to this idea of how many authors are there in this book, right? Because there's the author and then there's the narrator who's authoring the story, right? And the narrator, in this case, Ishmael, is inserting himself and removing himself in interesting ways from the narration, right? That has a definite slant. And to your point, Diego, which is an excellent point, by the way, one of the things that you see when you sort of try to grasp such a thing, if that's even possible for you, and it may not be, and that's no shame. As you get to know something, you also get to love that thing, right? Which I think was your greater point. I think that's what you were grasping at, or maybe I'm just stating it differently. And that's actually, again, I think we're still in setting mode as near as I can tell, and I think that's going to become really important, right? So we're still on land. We haven't even gotten on a boat yet, right? We're just kind of talking about boats. Everyone's little pieces. It's little hints, right, scattered throughout of boats. We're not even to the good stuff because I'm a sailor, so so let's get on the ocean. I'm all in. And it's an interesting way of doing set and setting because, as far as I remember, it's not really explicit that it's winter, and that hasn't been like, why is it winter? Why, Queequeg's here in the winter. That's a little weird. New England in the winter is kind of cold. I've been to New Bedford several times. You don't want to be there in the winter either, although it might be better than further north. And throughout this too, I'm not trying to give anything away, but there's a lot of foreign references, and it'll go foreign reference, local reference, foreign reference, local. It's like, what is going on? And me being from New England, all the local references I know Salem, I know New Bedford, I know all these places. Like, oh yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. I've been there. So yeah, it's interesting. And then there's all these foreign references I've never heard of before, and I'm just like, I know. I've heard a lot of stuff. I haven't heard of this though. That's pretty impressive. So yeah, but this idea of where he's inserting himself and how he's shaping the story of his, it seems to so far to be a story of his transformation, right? To your point, Diego, right? There's a transformative element in this section where he is kind of becoming okay with things, and then also, coming up gets even more interesting. Yeah, chapel in particular, chapter 7, there's going to be interesting too.
Yeah, and then Ishmael interrupts his observations of Queequeg, or I can't remember exactly where it comes. Yeah, so the experience of having Queequeg's arm grasping onto him when he wakes up reminds him of being a lad, where he tried to crawl up the chimney, and his stepmother punished him by sending him to bed at 2 a.m. during the summer solstice, or 2 p.m. during the summer solstice, which is a really harsh punishment there. Stepmother confirmed I'm sure. And apparently, he was able to fall asleep at like one of those afternoon naps, woke up in the dark, and had the sensation that there was somebody holding on to his hand, but he couldn't see who. And so it's like,
It's
you
a
know,
phantom.
it's yeah, it's a phantom of some sort. And you know, it's like that's an extremely realistic thing. I'm sure we've all had the experience of waking up in the middle of the night and seeing something that wasn't really there. Something that happens to me, I won't say commonly, but it's happened more than once, and it's odd. Is I'll wake up with the sensation that there's a stack of books falling on top of me, right? And I'll actually put my hands up to protect, and then there are no books. That's not where I put my books. So it's a very realistic sort of thing, and you know, it's in the night, right? He's coming out of chaos into that, and but the way he talks about it is yeah.
Well, I want to point out here, he states up front that he's not sure if this is a real event that he's remembering or if it's something that didn't happen. And so this is another one of those moments you've gotten kind of hints of it, but this is very explicit. Is this narrator trustworthy? Like, is he okay? You okay, bro? Because he's kind of telling you, I might not be okay. Right? And
right,
he's
right.
using,
Yeah, here's the money.
He's using here. That. You found it?
Yeah. Whether it was reality or a dream, I could never entirely settle. Now, was that the dream portion that he couldn't settle, or is it this entire story of the stepmother and being sent to bed?
I think it was what happened to him, not the story, but because
I don't know.
Like first of all, right? I would phrase this in sleep paralysis, right? Because he's talking about being unable to move and this ability, like this knowing that you can move but unable to will it to happen or something, or being unwilling to will, right? So it's this strange place where you're consenting to that what you're not consenting to, and like this is what I'm trying to get back to, right? Like so what's happening, right? Like he's getting imposed upon by this arm, right? And then he's consenting to it, but he doesn't know how, and then he's coping with it by understanding it to this story, right? Where and so he's making a path for him not to have to act, right? Like he's in some sense he's dissipating the energy of reactive reflexive action so that whatever transformation, right, needs to happen can happen, right? And this is like what an imposed transformation is, right? Like and he so he surrenders, right? But like he has this weird way of not surrendering, right? Like he well, he's lukewarm in some sense in the way that he's dealing with it, right? But it is literally the imposition of something really primal, right? Like something that you can't deny, and you have to relate yourself to, right? And so when we're talking about transformation, this is like the water welling up out of the ground or something, like and starting to flood, and it's like, okay, like deal with it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and this causes a shock, and then he relates that dreamlike experience back to the experience of being hugged by Queequeg, minus the fear.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little transformation to some extent.
And it's interesting, right, that he's connecting it to the most horrible experience he ever had, right? Even though more horrible things happen, right? So you could also see that if you go back to the coping frame, it's like, okay, like what's happening now is not as bad as what was happening then, and therefore it's okay.
Yeah, which, you know, a little bit of perspective in the moment can do you a lot of good. Yeah, very interesting, very strange chapter here. I've got another image I want to show you. Just this was to satisfy my own curiosity. They kept on talking about monkey jackets. I didn't know
Yes.
what that looked like. Um,
Yeah.
so I just, I think this is what they're talking about. This is what Google gave me, and that looks like something that a 19th century sailor
Yep.
would have worn. Um, and yeah, it looks to be a decently functional jacket. I'm not sure. I'm sure there was definitely some very specific purpose they were made for. I don't need to know about it. But yeah, we move on from chapter 4 into chapter
Well,
5.
hold on. I
Yeah,
want
one
to
last thing. Okay.
reiterate the marriage reference, right? Unlock his bridegroom clasp, right? So he's literally making it into the act of marriage, right? Like it's not only that they're married, it's the act of married. Also, like I found it interesting the use of toilet. They like he's
Oh,
using the
that's
word
like that's a 19th century way of speaking about it. It's the meaning of that is shifted in English. You just link it to the word toiletries, which is like your toothbrush, your razor, your deodorant, your soap. It meant all of the washing up to get ready for public today. It nowadays we
You
tend
didn't
to
have
use it.
bathrooms. Yeah,
Yeah.
you didn't have bathrooms.
Oh,
You'd
yeah,
have to be wealthy to have a bathroom. And so to toilet is to kind of take all the things out that you would normally have out in your bathroom, right? And then do all the things with those things. That's why. So it's more linked to the action. You know, because you're creating a temporary sort of bathroom in the moment. That's how it's used.
And another word that stood out to me is bedfellow. Like that was a really interesting way where like strange bedfellows. Like yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think he was leaning into that. I think he was definitely leaning into that. Alrighty, chapter 5, getting on to breakfast. So I think it says that all of the sailors in this inn had chosen to wear their monkey jackets to breakfast. That could be a very prosaic reason. It's fall or winter or early spring in New England. We're not quite sure yet, and just a little bit chilly. Poorly insulated house, poorly heated house, and so it might have just been to wear it. But Ishmael is at pains to note that everybody's sitting there kind of sheepishly, and these are all sailors. They all have the same profession. They all do the same sort of thing, and so you should have everything they need to just hit it off. Like you sit me down with a table full of priests, you put Mark at a table full of computer nerds. I'm sure there'd be places for Diego and Manuel that could similarly. You should just be able to hit it right off, and then they're all just sitting there kind of sheepishly, not really being able to talk to each other. And I got the sense that all of these sailors and all of these whalemen really prefer the wild, right? They prefer to be out there on the high seas, and they don't feel quite as home when the earth or when the ground underneath their feet isn't rocking back and forth.
Yeah, well, he says that when you've seen the world, you become quiet in your manner. Right? It's sort of like once you've been out in the wild, you don't want to rock the boat when you're at home, right?
Then Queequeg, continuing to be a little bit unusual, he only ate the little steaks that were put out. He wouldn't eat any of the other food, any of the vegetarian food, just the steaks. And he used his harpoon to reach across the table and grab the food, which is, again, it's like, well, why wouldn't you do that? Well, it's only convention that says you shouldn't do that. Convention and manners, but harpoon's just as good for picking those things up.
And
Yeah,
again,
also,
it's multi-purpose, right? Like
yeah, it also, I think the jacket thing is also, that's all they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's
what they live in. That's their house.
Right. They live in their house. Right.
So what stood out to me is that the environment contained the people, right? So like they became sheep in the house in some sense, instead of being wild. And like I think there's a lesson to take from that, right? Like that's real, right? Like if you come into a sacred space, people change. Like it's just like that.
And it's
That
the
happens.
exact opposite behavior than what the sailors were doing the night before when they were drinking. They were quite loud and boisterous. This could just be more than a hangover right here. It's that morning after reflective mood. You've had all the energy, you've had all the excitement, and now we're just eating breakfast.
And there's a preparation as well, right? Like it's like, okay, I'm preparing to be wild again in some sense.
Yeah, well, and he makes the sheepishly reference, and the sheepfold among the green mountains. That would be in Vermont, by the way. Lovely mountains, gorgeous. If you've never been, you can do the Green Mountains. They're awesome. I know they're not huge mountains, but they're New England mountains. Damn it. So, yeah. And it's interesting too because he identifies them all. So you can tell how long they've been at sea and which part of the sea they've been to, and some other outrageous claims.
Just based on how tan they are, which I don't know about you guys, but I'm about as tan as I ever get right now because I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm walking to class, back and forth every day. So I actually get to see the sun, whereas come January, it'd be less sunshine for me. So
you turn real red too. But yeah, he's pretty much that or red for you. Not good.
I'm getting it in appropriate doses now, so it's just tan. It's not
red
What do
like
you
the
guys make?
snakes.
What do you guys make of the relationship between doing things coolly, that anything done coolly is done genteelly? So
Yeah.
what do you guys make of that?
I mean, that's just true. It's like if you could just hold yourself properly,
Yeah.
you send out that signal into the world that, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. You'll fool people, or maybe you won't fool people. Maybe you really do know what you're doing, and this isn't hard for you. But you could also use that signal put out to the world if you're a really good liar to fool people. That's how all these con men work.
Right.
Is they
Mhm.
just
but I think too, this is another mixing, right? Because what he's saying, because at some point, like to be cool is to be elite among the street, right? You're down among the people, right? Doing a thing, right? Whereas genteel is linked specifically to the upper class, right? Politeness and coolness is not politeness.
now is that like a 1960s definition of the word cool? Because I think Melville, we're writing in the middle of the 19th century here. I think cool would more have a tone of self-assurance and not panicking, not letting things getting out of your hand, but it wouldn't have that, oh, this guy's with it with the latest thing. I'm not sure that word would have had that valence yet.
I don't.
Yeah.
But again, there is a class difference. Like if somebody was genteel, they would be associated with the upper class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if they're just calm, cool, and collected, which is actually all cool means in the 1960s too, actually, right? I mean, they're kind of, oh, he's cool, man. In other words, nothing rattles him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's specifically saying, well, because nothing rattles you, it's the same as being polite and upper class.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the way that works. I mean, to your point, yeah. I mean, this is how all good con men operate, right? No, nothing rattles them, and they engender trust and confidence, and then you're like, oh, all right, and you go along. But the upper class isn't like that. They have those politeness rules are in place so that you fit in, and so that you can make certain types of connections or have a certain level of intimacy, if you will. Since Manuel brought it up, now I can. Thank you, sir. You can have a certain intimacy with the people in that class.
So I think a good way to look at cool is not swept up by the spirit or not shaken by the spirit, right? And so what is being a gentleman, right? Like being a gentleman is having virtue, right? And like what does virtue allow you to do? Well, allows you to be in proper relationship to the spirit effectively, right? But also like what does experience or being grounded allow you to do, right? It allows you to weather the spirit, literally, right? Like they're weathered people. Um, and so like that, I think that's the relation, right? And now we have the opposition, right, about the structure that's inherited from cultivation and nature grooming you to be steadfast. So I had a couple other notes. It was interesting that he used the word see and then profession, like see blacksmith and see this. Like I never thought about that. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And he also was making a reference to allowing yourself to be at the butt of a joke, like
Hmm.
kind of for the sake of humor, right? Like that humor is a virtue.
Yeah, I think that goes with the well, the character of Ishmael being okay with accepting his fate, right? And he's fine with accepting his yoke, the yoke of a captain and the yoke of be not being in the upper class or being tossed or ordered around, and him acknowledging that. And there's this little street smart wisdom that he has. It's like, yeah, life is difficult enough, and when you find yourself in the event of giving someone a good hearty laugh, uh, lean into it. This is scarce.
Well, that's the funny thing about laughter too. This is, I think it's right at the beginning of the chapter. Um, the innkeeper is laughing at him for having been frightened of Queequeg the night before, and his kind of outrageous response to that. Um, and laughter it just has a really interesting function in human civilization. It it basically it comes from like a disruption of order and then the restoration of order, right? Um, it's almost through the laughter that the order is restored when people realize that something's gone wrong, but not so terribly wrong that we have something to mourn about. It was just an accident or an oopsie or a misunderstanding, and now we've got things leveled out a bit. And then it's like the tension of having encountered the chaos gets released by this emotional response of laughter. So yeah, again, we're just Herman Melville's showing us what the edge of the world is like here, and how all that stuff works. And
I want to keep this in mind for chapter 7 because like he comes back to this. But keep going.
okay. Yeah, Herman Melville is just continuing to show us what life at the edge of the world is like, which I think gets us into New Bedford, right?
Yeah.
And this is another one of those New England towns, and he talks about all of the different sailors, all of these very wild men from the edge of the world, how they're all dressed completely differently. And then he's got this absolute money line here. I'm going to go ahead and put up on the screen again. Go out and gaze upon the iron emblematical harpoons round yonder lofty mansion, and your question will be answered. Yes, all these brave houses and flowery gardens came from the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. One and all, they were harpooned and dragged up hither from the bottom of the sea. Can Herr Alexander perform a feat like that? And we were talking about that. I can't remember in what the context was, but we were talking about that in our last live stream, in our last book club, about how all of civilization comes from usually men going out to the edge into the chaos and bringing something back into it. And just A, it's true, and B, just showing us how deeply interconnected all this work is. That's something that is implicit in an earlier chapter has now become explicitly mentioned, but it was all there earlier for us to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting too because he basically says that New Bedford is a queer place, which I can tell you it certainly is, to this day. But he implies that it would just be as barren as Labrador, if not for the whalers. So basically, they build which is not true at all, but that's his thesis. Like, no, the whalers built this place and made it into a habitable place, right? They made habitable order out of what would be a windswept barren land. And then he does a lot of comparisons throughout this chapter with different towns in New England, for example. And he says the really interesting thing here is the place is basically made out of oil. But it's not the oil we talk about. It's the oil that preceded the oil that we talk about, which is even more interesting when you understand. So people say like, "Oh, it's the oil economy," and nonsense. That was happening before the discovery of oil. Oops, right? Oh, your thesis is completely wrong because you don't know any history. Sorry, right? Mm-hmm. But you do have to know that. But whaling was huge. Like, it was absolutely enormous. Whale oil and whale blubber in particular were ridiculously valuable, and that's part of the problem is that people think like the quote modern economy or something post the discovery of oil is something special, but actually it's nothing new at all. This is worse for sure. So yeah, the greatest environmentalist in history is still John Rockefeller. Sorry, you love to hate him, but actually you can't.
Yeah. No, this is, despite all the problems, I don't think we're getting away from petroleum-based products anytime soon.
Yeah, we weren't away from them before we discovered oil in the ground. So sorry, that didn't happen that way.
Alrighty. Chapter 6 was pretty short, so we don't have to linger there if you guys don't, because we want to get to the chapel, because this was absolutely amazing. So he talks about two things that I could remember very clearly. He talks about one, all of the plaques to the sailors on the walls while they're waiting for the chaplain to arrive. And then he talks about the pulpit, and like, just get a load of the pulpit here. Eagle-eyed viewers will note that this is actually at a Catholic church here, and you can tell because the priest has got his. It's a traditional Catholic church, but the priest has got his beretta on, and he's got his stole cross. It must be a hot day because he's taking his chasuble off to preach. All of those being perfectly legitimate, but I couldn't find one that made me think of New England Protestantism, but I wanted to show this one anyway, just to show that people have actually gone and done this. Have gone and made pulpits that look like that. And I'm quite certain that Herman Melville had seen a place like this and incorporated it into his stories.
Well, and I would argue that it's probably common for people to preach from ships like that.
Jesus did it once because there was a great crowd. He got out into a boat and just preached from just off the shoreline because he was afraid of getting trampled or something. But yeah, it's a real interesting thing.
Well, but again, so this comes after he starts talking about the whalers building the city of New Bedford. And then he's talking about the signs of shipping, whaling, sailing all over the church that he's in.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know what church this might have been. That would be interesting to know. I was thinking about, like, what kind of church is this? There's a lot of kinds of churches in New England. And actually, previous to that, right at the end of the previous chapter, he started mentioning the Puritan Islands, and I was like, what the I've never even heard of that. And it's the Providence Islands or something, but yeah, that was the other Puritan colony over by Nicaragua, apparently, which you learn something new every day. I was like, what? And it failed utterly. And it's been used as a case study for why some colonies that the Puritans in particular tried failed and some did not. I was like, oh, that's bookmark that.
Sorry for my ignorance. What are the Puritans? Like Puritans and like religious Puritans, or is this a particular?
Yeah, they founded New England. The place he's
yeah.
talking, they're the ones that landed at Plymouth Colony and founded, and they're the ones that more or less ran the U.S. I mean, they call them Yankees, but actually they're Puritans. The Puritans ran the U.S. government for the first 50 or 70 years. They were pretty much in control of the quote brand new country, right? And the fact that broke apart is kind of contentious. But yeah, and then so what happened is the Puritans got kicked out of England, and they were the sons of landed gentry. Right, so it wasn't the poor people. They brought some indentured servants with them, which is
they went to the Netherlands first,
right, and they got kicked out of England, went to the Netherlands, and even the Dutch got tired of them, which is just hard to imagine. And I would think they'd get tired of the Dutch first, but apparently no, which is just weird to me. But I guess strange things happen. And the Dutch were like, "Nah, we want these troublemakers out of here. I don't know. Let's go to the English king and tell him he's got to give them some land, and we'll let them raise some money, and we'll just get rid of them." And that's more or less what happened. And of course, the Dutch come by later and found New Amsterdam, which is New York City. But yeah, this is weird. But also everything in America is heavily influenced by the Netherlands because they declare independence 10 years before we do, right? And they get a constitution 10 years before we do. Unfortunately, they can't make anything work, and so it's all for naught.
Except for their dams. Their dams work great.
No, their dams are great, but their government thing never kind of took off, which is too bad. They could have had a cool government like us. Oh well. No bias here, by the way.
You're just jealous that we still have a king.
What action? We'll talk about that someday, Manuel. Yeah, maybe. Everybody wants one now. When who's in charge of the country? Thought we settled this in the revolution, but I guess you guys missed the memo about who's in charge of the United States. It's not supposed to be a single person, you muppet. Yeah. Anyway.
So death is everywhere in the church, and it's very present, right? So they and it's present everywhere in this book. It's just like the whales, the energy and the treasure comes from death, and the cost is often death, and that is a commonplace thing in this, and there's like we get a glimpse also of the ecosystem of what it means that you're in such a place, right? And it's not about only the sailors. No, it's about the widows, and there's the other bunch of orphans, and there's all the little boys, and there's the little girl. They don't know what's going on. It's like they're going to still do it, and and there's the shares, and then we get into the economical aspect of it. It's like people participate in it, and it's this very fascinating unraveling of the consequences of what it means to be in this high risk, high reward thing, and the solemnity that comes from the fact that they are dealing with like final things, very it's every day.
Right. No, I like that point. Right. So I mean, if you want to go crazy symbolism, you could say Quick puts on his hat, right, the upper, and then he puts on his boots underneath, right, and then it flips. Right. He goes and he sees the monuments to the dead, and then he ponders he's probably going to be one of them, and then he ponders how many people died and didn't get monuments, right? And then it's like, oh, look at this beautiful church with all this whaley stuff in it, right? After having said explicitly New Bedford would be a worthless wasteland if not for the whalers. Not true at all, by the way, but like I get what he's doing. It's very clever, and it's like, oh wow, right? I mean, New Bedford's a great port. It's unbelievable port. It's what a wonderful port. It's just fantastic. Now that they got breakwaters and dams and stuff in there, it's even better. But yeah, it's still a great natural port city. So the idea that these sort of people who are risking their lives are building the highest thing, right? And it's exemplified all the way up in the chapel itself is very interesting.
And you see these widows coming into the church, right? And it's very obvious that they're still carrying the grief. And then part of what he holds on to is just the grief where their husbands are lost in the unknown. There's no tombstones, there's no burial plots, there's no place for them to visit. And if you didn't understand how human beings worked, you would think that they would want to just avoid the place that reminds them of this. But instead, you're going to find, and I, as the professional church person here, I can tell you, very often the people you'll find at the church most are widows, even when they're continually, reminded of death, all the funerals that will happen, proclaiming the death of Jesus continually, and especially in this particular chapel. And it's almost like the appropriate container for death is the church, right? Because we're the ones who at least proclaim to have a remedy to it. Through Jesus' death, we're the one that we give life. We can orient you towards this. We could actually make the meaningful something that just seems utterly chaotic here. And I think that that'll keep on coming up over and over again.
Yeah,
because this is a wild man, and he says, but all of the sailors, what is it? Few are the moody fishermen shortly bound for the Indian or Pacific Ocean who failed to make a Sunday visit to the spot. I am sure that I did not. Right. So even these wild men from the edge of the world need to have that connection to the center of the world, which is the prow, which is the pulpit.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Like I thought he was actively rejecting the church, and then he still visits. That's curious, right? And then the Queequeg, jeez, what in
Queequeg, yeah.
Queequeg, he's he's also there, right? So it's like what's going on, right? Like there's people that aren't supposed to be there that are drawn in there, right? And then you get a re-instantiation of what's happening in the tavern, right? Like everybody's there, right? They're unified in a profound way, but they're separate. They're individuals. There's the inability, right? And like maybe that's the primal thing, right? Like the primal thing is not to civilize.
The chaplain hasn't shown up yet.
Okay,
right.
Sorry.
They're sitting there quietly, and it's like when the chapel starts. If you didn't get here, they all sing a song together.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Right.
sorry, I haven't read
Right.
that far because like I was
Mhm.
a muppet, but the this idea, right, that there's this thing that unifies people, and then they still get like, well, they don't have the means to establish the union or something, right? And like if you say that the chaplain actually is able to manifest that, right, like that would be like the heavenly principle that brings together that which below it, which is really interesting. Beside that, he's coming in, right, and he's shaking off the sleet from my ice glazed hat and jackets, right? So like that, there's a skin on his skin, right? So there's like nature imposed itself upon the civilized thing, and like he adorns that, and like, so there's also a new way of becoming naked in the church. Like there's a taking away of covering the self. So that was also interesting. And yeah, the last thing that stood out to me in this is like, man take heed of the physical manifestation of the dead over the comfort that can be found in their example. Right? So there's a this pragmatic materialist focus that he has, where it's like, no, I just want to do things like I want to just make things happen. Like all of this stuff upstairs, like it can remain upstairs because I don't need it, because I can just do my thing downstairs. And there's this tension, right? Because he's still in the church. Like, why are you in the church if that's your position? So, like,
Yeah, but that's reverence for the things they've built. Right. That's the reverence for, oh, the people built this that came like before me. And there's a value in that.
Ishmael also talks about what are the paradoxes that you'll notice in death inside the church. How it is that we still refuse to be comforted for those who we nevertheless maintain are dwelling in unspeakable bliss. And so all of these paradoxes that the death ends up bringing out there. This is something that you do see, that people will be at the funeral of a very pious person, somebody that we're all fairly certain is going to make it, just because of the uprightness of their life and their devotion to the Lord. And nevertheless, there's that pain at the parting there, just kind of the mixed feelings that people have to go through, because sometimes you see it like people are thinking that they really shouldn't be crying because they are certain that their grandma's in heaven. So why are they still sad there? Just the great, I don't know. That's the most powerful manifestation of chaos in the world is death itself, because not only is this person's individual body breaks down, but takes a chunk out of whatever bigger body that they were belonging to and throws confusion on everybody who encounters it.
Yeah, did you? I'd love to hear your take on but faith like a jackal feeds among the tombs, and even from these dead doubts she gathers her most vital hope. I was like, well, that's a line, and it's a paragraph too, which is even funnier. I love how he just breaks the language all over the place. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, when he talks about something that's among the tombs, I always think of Legion and the man who was possessed in the Gospels, who was, as the Gospel writers helpfully point out, was living among the tombs and could not be shackled, but was able to break the shackles. And Jesus has to be the one to come and drive the whole legion of demons out of him into a herd of swine, which careen down the slope and all go into the ocean. And he's been delivered from the demons there. So being among the tombs is like just a phrase that in the mind of a Christian will probably bring you back there.
Well, it's interesting too, because you pointed this out earlier, like who's in church? Widows. So faith is feeding like a jackal. Like, I love the term phrase. It's fantastic. Right? Feeding like a jackal, right? And links it to vital hope. Not regular hope, vital hope. So it flips so much. It's that I sort of found interesting. And then of course that was hard for me to understand. Obviously, there's all kinds of references I knew I wasn't gonna get. But then the last line of that chapter too, or maybe the last two lines.
Hold on a second, because I'm stuck on this dead doubts. Like, what are dead doubts?
I mean, I think it's part of it. We were just talking about the sense this whole paragraph about the paradoxical and strange effect that death has on people, where they'll, at one hand say, oh, this person's in a better place and is living in inexplicable bliss. Yet at the same time, they're still terrified of death, and everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. It's basically a lot of
Right.
what that comes down to.
Well, and all your doubts are gone when you're dead.
Yeah, but okay, but like, so the way I see fate is that it's the antidote to doubt, right? Like you go in
Yeah,
over,
it
over
kills
the,
all your doubts. Faith kills all your doubts. Right? They're all dead. Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you do that by having hope first. Like, I'm
No, he's linking it here: faith in the beginning and hope in the end.
You
That's
could
what I
almost
mean by
think
the
of it
flipping.
like somebody who's not been tested and not been tried hasn't been built up through trial. Like that's
right.
pretty obvious, right?
Mhm.
He has this image of these widows who go to church, and they get to church early, and he specifically points out that they're reading the plaques on the walls, the memorial of these fallen sailors, right? They're continually confronting perhaps the worst thing that ever happened to them is learning the news. No, it's even worse than that, because they would have just kept on waiting for the ship to come back, and then it's like, the ship isn't coming back. The ship isn't coming back. The ship isn't coming back. Did he leave? Did he abandon me? We didn't get any news even, because they're out in the middle of the Pacific. No guarantees about anything.
Did he just
All
leave?
of that weighing on there, right? The constant wait. Did he just leave me? Did he just shack up with some chick in the Philippines? And they just keep on coming back to the church, and it's like they're continually acting in faith, ends up killing the doubt, and the faith feeds on that.
Right.
Which is a hard saying.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really rough.
Yeah.
This is like there's no other antidote as far as I can tell.
Yeah. This last sentence, can we? I just.
Yeah, this last paragraph, dude. It's
Oh
just,
yeah. When
all
he,
of it. It's just...
this is not good Aristotelian theology right here. Just to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I don't understand the reference. Jove himself cannot. Like, what? Where did that come from?
Is that Jehovah? Because that's what I was thinking.
No, Jove is
No.
another name for Zeus or Jupiter.
Oh, so that's a
Oh.
reference to Neptune being the okay.
So it's another pagan reference.
In church.
Yeah, but this whole sequence is all about the night before leaving on the ocean, right? That's the ethos here. I didn't see an Aristotelian theology. You want to say more about that?
No. In fact, take my body who will. Take it, I say, it is not me. And like, you can see how that's true, because according to Thomas Aquinas, the soul is the subsistent form of the body, and it can exist out, without being connected to the body. But also, according to Thomas Aquinas, the body is the proper conjoined instrument of the soul, through which the soul conducts its activity. Therefore, you can't just say, "Oh, this body, I can do with it whatever I want." It is actually precious, which is why Catholic Church doesn't allow scattering ashes, because that body's supposed to rise again, and if you scatter the ashes, I mean, the Lord will still raise that body again, but you're not bestowing faith in that. So yeah, I don't know what to make of this line.
So what I was reading, that it wasn't Aristotelian but Platonic, and I think, right, the stove boat, right, like a boat is a vessel, right, and stove means like broken and a broken body, So there's a recognition of the fallen nature, and not identifying with the fallen nature.
Hmm. Yeah, a tiny agnostic. So, but I'm a bit puzzled by. So we can comment on that, but I'm also very confused by the word stave and stove. I don't know they're kind of used
Yeah.
like adjectives and verbs here. I have no idea what they mean. I mean, like stave my soul, like that this pagan god cannot do it. For me, maybe it's like this pagan god cannot make my soul go into perdition. It's kind of what I intuit from the context,
Mm.
but
Well,
I don't
so
know exactly.
stove boat and stove body are broken, right? And
Okay.
stave is to break. It's to break
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
apart.
yeah.
That's one of the
Okay.
definitions, right?
Okay.
And so he's saying Jove himself cannot
Yeah.
do any better effectively, right? So that I found interesting. So I mean, this is all around his death, effectively, right? The boat breaks, my body breaks, right? But my soul can't be driven apart.
And I think Jove might be like the stand-in for the material god, effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough line. This is for you non-native English speakers here. This is tough for native English speakers. Um, and this is the sort of thing that can only work in writing when you've got the opportunity to just go back and read it over and over again to try and figure out what's going on here. This would not work in any kind of oral performance here.
Oh yeah, no, the Platonism is before, right? Like it's observing the thick water to the thinnest air, right? This is like the heavenly what is it? It's like the spiritual realm, right? Like transcends matter, right? And therefore we have, well, it's eternal, and therefore like it's similar to the refractoring of light, that you can get a good picture. Like you're gonna have a diluted, and it's interesting because like he's identifying with the oyster, which is like encapsulated, blah blah blah. But it's also like looking up, right? So normally you think of the what is it? Yeah, the refraction when looking into water, instead of into air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Like the thinking water is like air. Is also a Platonic reference, I feel, of the echoes in the wall, on the cave, in the wall of the cave, right? The echoes in the cave, and we think they are the real deal, but they're just refractions, right? They're not uh, the real telos, the real gestalt of things, and we need to go and find that, right?
Yeah, and thick water, right? Thin air. There's a reference to the solidity of what you're relating to.
Yeah, but I think the upshot here is that Ishmael isn't particularly afraid of death.
Right.
That
Yeah.
he's like, well, you know, I'll I'll get there when I get there, and when it happens, I'll be ready for it. He's got a pretty bold attitude towards it.
But not the Christian answer.
No, no. But Ishmael isn't a part of the. He's a child of Abraham, but he isn't the child of the promise. So you can't expect him to always be getting everything right. He's a little wild. I think the Bible actually calls him a wild ass of a man.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you're always going to get that. All right, do we want to start talking about the pulpit, chapter 8?
I do.
Yep.
I do.
I mean, I guess my impression of Father Mapple is he's both the sailor and the chaplain, and so he represents a rare sort of person that you might meet with a very complete So he has both been able to go out into the world, out into the edge of the world, out into the chaos, and do well there as a sailor, and also come back in and embody the center. And he can live in both places. He can draw on the fullness of all of that, which is a very rare feat to see somebody with such broad capabilities and
Well, that's
and
more
being able to do
mixing
that.
lowest and highest.
Right, but he was able to do both. I like it. It's
Right. He right,
So-
but that's actually really important because again, he goes into, oh, there's all this seafaring stuff around the church. It's not a regular church, right? It's seafaring church.
But he has to access the pulpit by crawling up a ladder that you would use on the side of a
Rope
ship.
ladder. Yeah.
And he's what is it? At the time I now write of, Father Mapple was in the hardy winter of a healthy old age, the sort of old age which seems merging into a second flowering youth, right? So it's like, oh, he's almost immortal, right?
Right.
He's got this
Yeah,
font of vitality inside of him where he just keeps on going, right?
Right, but also he enters with a venerable robustness, which is interesting. And then he kind of notes like he didn't come with an umbrella, he didn't come in a carriage, like he walked through the weather like the rest of us. Then he gets up this rope ladder, and then he pulls it up behind him. And Ishmael doesn't understand the why pull it up behind you? What's going on?
Well,
But
also the jacket is weighing him down, which is I think really important, right? Like, so he's a weathered man, like literally, like he's
that's
carrying
true.
his past. But then he also takes it off, right? Like, so he can also like lose it. So.
Yeah, there's indeed. I think Father Eric, that you point out something very good. That there's this many echoes of the virtue, right? The skill, and the knowing and the putting things in the right place and the bringing together and the wielding, but in right proportion, right? And it also again, which is the kind of skill that you require in order to put things in the right place. So, for example, making the decision for the congregation that the pulpit shall be a lonesome place, right? It will be a private place. And this is there are clear categories, and they're being demarcated by the individual, right? So
yeah, it's interesting to see Ishmael's reaction to the pulpit here. Can it be then that by the act of physical isolation, he signifies his spiritual withdrawal for a time from all outward worldly ties and connections? I'm not sure that's actually correct. Like, I think Ishmael might not. And see, Ishmael's a little bit of a fish out of water here. He is fully the fringe man, fully out of the chaos. The coming into the church is a bit of a strange experience for him, and what naturally comes to more central people appears to be a little bit more different from him. I don't think it's necessary isolation. And at a certain lack of worldliness, but you go up the pulpit so that you could be seen and heard because you're going to exemplify something that everybody needs to look at. And
But
so,
it is,
Right.
but it is a ship in the air,
ideal.
right?
Right. He's separating himself as the ideal, as the thing that's getting looked up to. In other words, he is putting himself in the spirit, like the spirit's up there somewhere, right? And I think that's what he's pointing to, right? And that's why the ladder gets withdrawn.
And like it's a ship, right? It's a vessel, it's a container, but it's in heaven. So it's like what's that about? and then he's the only one on it, right? So like if we go back to the story of Noah, right? Like Noah preserved, right? Like he gathered everything meaningful and isolated it, right? Like from the flood. So I think if you look at that as like a withdrawal, right? Like in some sense it's a withdrawal to make things sacred so that they then can repopulate as seeds, right? And like
Mhm.
I think that is the proper pattern that you have to do when you're on the pulpit, right? Like you would gather the seeds and then you spread it back out.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think Ishmael does get to it. Talks about the pulpit is the world's foremost part. All the rest comes in the rear. The pulpit leads the world, and it's like, yeah, that's actually exactly how it works, right? Somebody exemplifies something, said that signal out into the world. People follow after that. It doesn't go the other way around. What
Well,
really matters is what's up there on the pulpit.
right, but he starts that with what could be more full of meaning, right? Oh, indeed, what could be more full of meaning, right? And that's because that highest thing can contain all the connections. As he's mentioned connections, there's all this flipping going on, right? He's mentioning the severing of the connections and saying the pulpit, what could be more full of meaning? Oh, indeed, what could be more full of meaning? Right. So it's that flip again, which is just delightful.
And so like it's also interesting, right? Like so the bow pierces into chaos, right? But what was the other like in so it has to be strongest as well, right? Like it's leading, but it's also most
Vulnerable.
tested.
Yeah.
Yeah, and vulnerable to going astray.
Yeah.
And if you remember the picture that you had, right? Like the ship wasn't finished, right? Like it was only in the front of the ship there was the pulpit, and like where's the rest? Like it's like everything follows in the wake.
Yeah. Very cool.
Well said.
Yeah. Yeah. All righty. How about we get on to that sermon there, because that sermon was a real that was just really good. So this hymn that they're singing, um, when I read it, I was like, oh, this is just a paraphrase of Jonah's prayer from the bottom of the ocean, in the belly of the whale. I think that's all of chapter 2 of the book of Jonah. Yeah, so this is what we were talking about. When Father Mapple finally shows up, everybody sits down, everybody pauses, everybody watches and pray, and then they sing a song together. So once he shows up, the congregation is able to form into one, whereas previously they were all, scattered about in the lack of unity there. And he gives a really interesting sermon right here, and the sermon is very imaginative, right? It doesn't contradict the story that we get in the Bible at all, but it's like a meditation of, well, here's how it could have happened, where Jonah is trying to run away from God's legitimate command, right? He's running away from the center, tries to go to the edge of the world, which, here's a point where biblical scholarship is actually somewhat useful, being able to identify what port in Spain he was probably sailing to. It's like, hey, there's one thing. Biblical scholarship can actually do that one thing pretty well. So we should just leave them to that. And he had the twofold lesson in there. So it gets this very vivid image of Jonah, his own conscience tormenting him, but he's still running away from God, and everybody just looking at him and immediately seeing, oh, this guy's trouble, and they like compare his face to a wanted poster, and it's not really him. And then he gets on the boat, and the storm comes. He sleeps during the whole most of the storm, and even when the sailors realize that he's the reason that they're in trouble, they still try and save him, but it's no avail. So they throw him off. And then the two lessons that he draws from this. The first one talks about how Jonah understands that his punishment was just, him being swallowed by the whale and taken to the bottom of the ocean. And for sinners, you should just rejoice in the fact that your punishment is just, and that's what will cause God to hear you, is when you acknowledge the proper ordering of, yeah, I sinned and I'm being punished now, and now I'm just going to acknowledge the proper order of that. That was what was the kind of repentance that was most pleasing to God, right? And not, trying to just save your own skin by saying you're sorry. And then the second lesson he drew.
Confess and repent. Very important.
And then the second story he drew was kind of a reflection on his own status as having been lifted up as a preacher, just how terrible it is to be in that position, and how you should prefer to be despised by the world than to, if you're a preacher, if you're being held up as a model and example, you should prefer to be despised by the world than to abandon God and not do your job.
Well, and it starts with him running away, as if to run away from to go to a place where God wasn't. I like that whole thing. I was like, oh, okay, you're trying to escape God. Yeah, sure.
Which is he's just preaching the Bible story, right? He fills it in with a lot of extra detail, but he's just preaching that Bible story right there.
Maybe that's a better way to preach. Interesting. Is that a Catholic thing? It didn't sound like a very Catholic event.
Sometimes I'll do something kind of like that, but never to that level.
Oh, that's that level's insane. And then the captain did this, and
yeah. Like sometimes when I'm preaching, it'd be like, oh, this leper has been separated from society. He hasn't been touched by anybody in years. And just imagine what it would feel like to receive the first loving touch from Jesus. I'll do it on that level, but this kind of level is something else.
I have the sense that every time I go through this chapter, I have the sense that this could be quoted verbatim and would be a slam dunk of a sermon anywhere, anytime. It's just so insanely cool. It is so rich.
Mm-hmm. But it only really works because he's a sailor talking to other sailors, right? Shipmates, I can't go up from the pulpit and call people shipmates. That's dumb. I'm not a sailor. The farmers in North Dakota are also not sailors.
They don't know anything about the water. Yeah.
Well, they know how to go out on a boat and fish for walleye,
maybe,
which is great. But
I think you should try. I think you'd get further than you'd assume. But,
I definitely should not try that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Also, there's the flipping again, right? Going from the highest to the lowest, and the implications of all that, right? And it seems like it's building. Like there's a flipping and maybe some little implications. Flipping. You get to this, it's like no. Here's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like A, if you run away. B, if you try to run away from something you can't run away from. C, if you don't confess and repent. Right. And also, even if you do, right, like there's still repentance. Like there's still a consequence, a cost to be paid.
Mm-hmm. And the overwhelming question I got reading this in the context of what we had talked about last week is, well, why are you going to the edge of the world? Because everybody on the boat was going the same place, right? They were going to Tarshish, which was in Spain, the other side of the Mediterranean. But what spirit is it that's dragging you out there, right? If you're just going out there to do the ordinary sailor things, your conscience will be at peace. You'll be properly aligned with everything around you. But if you're going out there because you're trying to flee the center for some reason, for no good reason, that's when you get yourself in trouble.
So I just want to be clear because I'm so confused. Are you saying Telos matters?
Yes.
Should
people
we
can
make
do the
Final
same
Cause
thing.
great again?
People can do the same thing with different teloses. And that's what makes it really tricky, right? It's like, oh, what are you doing on your YouTube channel, Father Sites? You're
Right.
doing the
So-
exact same thing as somebody else on that YouTube channel over there. But what
Well,
is
and
it
one-
pointed at?
Right, and one bad Telos can spoil the bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that one bad apple. But I think it's interesting, right? Because like yes, right, you're completely right. Like you can't discern the dealers from the direction that you're moving, but it's a direction that's chosen among many directions, right? So there's like, can you really pick that direction with a pure sailor heart, right? Or is there multiple
Yeah.
things playing, right? And I think there's a confusion in the people, right? When they get the wrath of God, it's like they all are like, wait, why am I going here, right? Like, am I pure of heart? Like, um, so
Well,
it,
and there's also there's many there's a segment of the sermon that goes about the fact that because it was evident that he was in trouble and his telos was the wrong one. That's why he also didn't haggle. That's why he got completely ransacked with the fee. But
Oh,
the
do you remember
captain,
that?
yeah.
Do you remember that
and
part
and
from the very first chapter when he talked about the difference between being paid to sail and paying to
yeah,
sail?
yeah, exactly.
Here it is again.
And how exactly and the well the temptation, right? Because he's talking about Jonah, but he pauses to say like no. They're, they could smell there was something up, and they were more than willing to profit from it.
So
So
the
they're
captain
gonna push
charges
the
him.
envelope.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
captain charges him 3 times the rate,
yeah,
and then thinks nothing of taking the money. Right,
yeah,
but that he did that to confirm his suspicion, and still didn't care. Right, and
Yeah.
so they are all in on it. But it is a, if you're in on it, if you know somebody has a bad telos, the punishment might be coming for you too.
hmm
So you should be careful, right? And yeah, I mean they try to protect him, and then that doesn't work because they're really trying to protect their conscience and taking the money. And also, like, he's all comfy throughout part of the storm, right? Which again, to your point, Father, harkens back to the that first chapter with the money and the you pay for comfort, otherwise you work hard on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
so I want to draw attention to the distinction between the telos of a sailor versus the telos of the captain, right? Because like you could be a true sailor to go to the end of the world, right? But now, like, if you're a captain, you choose where the ship is going, right? So you chose that part, right? Like you intentionally went there.
Well, the pathing doesn't change your telos, right? That was the point. The fact that you're going to Tarshish doesn't matter. What matters is why. How you get there doesn't matter. What matters is why you're doing it, and that makes a big difference. And that's how we get in trouble, right? We keep looking at the wrong things, things that indicate what happened, and not things that indicate why it happened. But there is a way to see why it happened from what happened. Of course, it's not straightforward, but you can do that.
Yeah.
And the story exemplifies that, right? Because they sort of probe him, and they know, Jonah's not. He's not going for the reasons we're going for. Right. And so they do sense, and they do take him on anyway. So fair enough. But yeah, I do like the super, we'll call it the ultra customized sermon. Personalized for your profession.
If you're not going to personalize it to the congregation that's in front of you, you should just let them preach to themselves, right? Because it's all there in the book. They could just read it and figure it out for themselves. So the job of the preacher, is to try and bring the book down into the lives of the people.
I think if we break off from the Catholic Church, we can do that pretty effectively. Oh, never mind.
No, I couldn't.
I
couldn't give one of St. Augustine's homilies because A, I'm not St. Augustine, and B, I don't live in 5th century North Africa, right? It's like my job is to bring it into 21st century America, wherever I happen to be. So I gotta preach the word like that. So I'll talk to the farmers in North Dakota. That'll be my plan.
Keep up the good work, Father.
I told people to go to confession today.
Excellent.
Good. I don't have that option, and I miss it. It's yeah, Protestant churches now, they're just a bit different. It's
Missing all the good parts.
So are you, Mark.
What do you think?
Right. So it's interesting. I had this reference to facing Leviathan. I guess I'm a little bit off field, but when I was thinking, it's like what is Leviathan? Well, that's that which is welling up from the deep, right? And so like what's the thing that's welling up from the deep? Well, that's the thing that is like preceding that which is manifest, right? Like there's a what is it? Like there's a
Potential?
foreshadowing. Yeah, but it's like a well, right? It's like because the association that I was having is like, okay, like I'm getting put into moods, or I would call them atmospheres, right? Like there's like this thing that is holding my spirit or something, right? Or allowing my spirit to be, right? And like what's that, right? Like that's like beyond, right? And it's like, okay, like where's this coming from, right? Like that's like welling up from like this deep place. Like I was thinking, okay, like I need to face this, right? Because like this is where the answer is, and I'm like getting this visceral reactions, like, no, I don't want to go there. like that's like a really scary place that you shouldn't traverse, right? But yeah, there's something in this depth, right? Like there's this monster, but it's also it's like dictating, right? But it's not dictating in a direct way, right? It's dictating in a constraint of an aura of fear or something, right? Like
it's like a feminine kind of constraint. Yeah.
Oh yeah, kind of, yeah. And yeah, so I was like, oh, right, that's real. that's something you have to relate to, and it's like it's interesting that falls with the Moby Dick.
Well, you just hold on to that thought because I think it's going to come up again. Don't ask me how I know. Definitely isn't because I've read the book before.
That's
well,
what,
I'm prophesizing the book. Okay, like it's fine.
All righty. Well, my goodness, another great discussion here. Anybody got any final thoughts before I close this off?
Yeah, I want to invite people to join. Like we need the divine feminine. Like I'm lost here. Okay.
Okay.
I just want Ted back. That's all. That's all I want. That's all I want for Christmas.
All I want for Christmas. Yeah. Okay. All righty. Well, I will post the next homework assignment in the Discord server, and delighted to have you all on board. Anybody who's listening, if you want to join on in, the link to the Discord server is in the description. You're free to hop on, or you could just leave your thoughts and start a discussion there if you really want. So,
Like,
my
subscribe,
sailors-
share. There.
yeah, all of that YouTube algorithm stuff. Don't like this video. Save your likes for something else. But my sailors, repent and do good. See you all later.